Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Fundamentalists Podcast. It's been a moment, and we hope you're having an excellent, stress-free holiday season. I'm here once again with Dr. Peter Rollins, but this time it's a little bit different, folks. Things have changed. Life is moving at breakneck speeds for all of us. It's hard to keep up. What's going on Twitter? We're going to talk about it. But first, we need to catch up with Dr. Peter Rollins, philosopher, writer, who is currently getting used to his new home in Belfast, Ireland, Northern Ireland, and has behind him, if you aren't listening or watching the video version, he has behind him a very beautiful, stunning Christmas tree. And it looks wonderful. Now, Pete, can you explain both a little bit about the tree, what your inspiration was, and then if you don't mind, and I know this won't be as fun for our audio listeners, but if you could do what you did for me just a moment, just before we started hitting record, where you walked over to that tree to reveal how incredibly large it is and how small in comparison it looks in the frame, because it looks like you're doing a Lord of the Rings forced depth perception thing, and it's really fascinating.
I was going to say it's not necessarily how large the tree is, but how short I am. But I'm going to make my way over to it right now. Here we go.
Okay, give him a moment. He's hopping on over there. Look at him go. Really great. That is a big, big tree, Pete. And you're a big, big boy.
It is a big tree for a very short man.
It's a big tree for a good boy.
You're the Christmas guy. I'm not the Christmas guy. I haven't done a tree for decades.
Yeah, you lapped me. My tree, we didn't do one this year because by the time it was time to put it up, we were like, we're just going to put it down and we go out of town. And then we got this little tiny, like 6-inch thing. And it's kind of cute, but it's nothing like that. So now I'm excited next year to do that. Because you said that's 10 feet tall?
I think roughly maybe 10 feet. I think, yeah.
Really cool. Really cool, man. Well, how's Ireland? How are you, Pete? Tell everyone what you're up to. What's going on?
Yeah, I'm good. I have been home now a month, and it's been great. Love it. Living in Belfast, settled into the apartment. Everything is very refreshingly cheap in comparison to LA. I mean, this is a nice apartment, you can see, but it's actually relatively cheap whenever you're coming from Los Angeles, so that's nice. In this global recession that some people are trying not to say is a recession, it's good to kind of like not spend so much money. And it feels like I have never been away. I was 15 years out of Belfast and I feel like I've never left the place.
Wow. Have you gotten, have people given you a hard time for being a Hollywood elitist?
Well, they always do, you know, but I give the Hollywood elites a hard time and they give me a hard time. So yeah.
It's perfect. It's the natural order of things.
Yes,
Were you able to immediately connect with all of your friends and family? And was there a party? Did they say welcome back in any kind of like way, or are they just like, oh hey, yeah, you're back, cool?
Yeah, you know, it was just kind of like, all right, how's it going? You know, like as if I'd never left.
Perfect.
But the first night I arrived, I ended up in this place called Boundary, which is it's got this tap room, and saw old friends there. So it's been I kind of probably do more stuff here than in LA, and LA's got technically so much stuff is happening. But here's the thing, and not that we're going to get into this, but I was reading Jean-Paul Sartre and Lacan recently, and reading Lacan, who said that if God does not exist, nothing is permissible, which is a play on what Sartre said. So Sartre.
Hold on, that's too many negatives. I gotta wrap my head around that. If God doesn't, then there's no, which means there is. Wait, what? Explain, huh?
Yes. Okay. Well, let me take a step back and say the easy one first. So Jean-Paul Sartre, in a famous essay called "Existentialism is a Humanism," he quoted, kind of misquoted, but it wasn't in a bad way, but he kind of paraphrased one of the characters in one of Dostoevsky's books in The Brothers Karamazov, who said, if God is dead, or if God does not exist, then everything is permissible.
Everything. Okay.
Right. Now, that's what Sartre said. So what Dostoevsky said, I think, was, if God does not exist, then there's no objective authority to tell us what's right or wrong. Okay?
Yeah, the training wheels are off. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like there's nothing written in the stars to say whether charity giving is good and murder is wrong. So, and Sartre builds his whole existentialism on that kind of principle. But then Lacan cleverly kind of pokes a little bit of fun at Sartre and says, well, if God does not exist, then nothing is permissible. And in a nutshell, and we may want to talk about this or we may not, but what Lacan is saying is, weirdly, whenever, if you take God as the lawgiver, right? If God is the one who kind of tells you what's right or what's wrong, is written in eternity. If there is no law that is written in eternity and you can literally do whatever you want, human beings get so anxious that most of them end up doing nothing. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because in LA, where you kind of, in one sense, have the demand to, you can do whatever you want, go out, have sex with whoever you want, have relationships, friendships, do whatever you want. More and more people are paralyzed and do nothing and do none of that and find dating more and more difficult. And technically, there is no external law saying you shouldn't go out and have sex, you shouldn't go out this or that. But what happens is people put more and more of their own prohibitions on themselves. So even taking drugs has to be done in really complex ways. And even going out becomes dangerous and terrifying. And so coming away from LA, where, as Lacan would say, God does not exist and everything is permissible, but where actually nobody does anything and everybody's isolated and afraid, it's kind of interesting to come back to Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to the LA part, definitely not the Ireland part, but I was thinking about earlier, I saw something, I was just thinking about all these new dating websites that keep cropping up and how they get more specific with each kind of like generation of these apps. Like one, like you start with like Tinder and it's just a free for all. And then it's like, well, this is if you want to really be in love. And this is if you want like a family. And this is if you want somebody who has your political values. And this is if you want somebody who has the same height or that you want or whatever. And it's like the whole thing is just getting more and more. And it's like the paralysis of having every option available to you just, I think, makes people go like, it's too much. This doesn't work. It's not me enough. And so the companies then go, oh, here's something that's a little bit more tailored to you. And I figure in about 40 years, every dating app will be like, you just put your thumbprint on your phone or whatever, or it'll be in your head, and then they'll just automatically match you with one specific person. So we're headed toward that's.
We're headed towards that. Yeah, there's a Black Mirror.
The free market. Oh yeah, there is a Black Mirror about it. Dang, yeah. I thought I was being clever.
Absolutely. On that as well, what was I going to say is, I mean, I know people who have thought about going back to church. Not because they believe in any religious God or anything like that, but because going to somewhere like Hillsong or some conservative church provides more opportunity for dating. That going back to a place with more restrictions and more prohibitions and more impossibilities actually generates more possibility for relationships. That, as you said, like, and this is the kind of one of the readings of what anxiety is anxiety is actually the terror of having too much opportunity and therefore having no one to blame for your unhappiness but yourself, and also thinking everybody else is happy. So actually, you mentioned it in terms of dating apps, it's very clever that they do that. Is, you know, people are going, I actually need more restrictions in order to potentially be able to have freedom. And it
bums me out too, because there's just so many people who are like, there's clearly a huge market for this because there's so many people are lonely. I mean, I guess there's a reason podcasts are so, popular, because you need somebody next to you in the room while you're getting ready. And if that's us right now, hello, and you look great.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, it is just, I think, the modern phenomenon. We are in the age of anxiety. And I think even with lots of anxiety-related mental health issues, we see loads of them. And even when we talk about autism, in terms of the kind of the lower end of the spectrum of autism, you can see that as partly a phenomenon that arises in a modern age in which possibility is oceanic, that you're being told everywhere that you can do whatever you want, even picking a soda, or even going, picking what bread you want. I go to the supermarket and there's 25 types of bread to choose. If you lived in a feudal age, you didn't get to choose what you did for a job. You had no social mobility. You didn't choose who you were going to marry. Like, you were kind of on tracks. Now, that was
Yep.
shit, but that created different mental health issues. One of the things it didn't probably generate is excessive amounts of societal anxiety. But today we live in this profound anxiety for exactly the opposite reason than people think. People think that anxiety comes from not getting what you want, like anxiety comes from being distant from something. But if you take the kind of Lacanian notion, anxiety arises precisely whenever you're given all of the opportunities, whenever suddenly
Right.
everything is opened up to you. This experience both causes anxiety and also prevents you from doing anything.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do HelloFresh a lot. You know, that service that we would
Oh yeah.
happily sponsor on this podcast if they're listening.
Yeah.
Um, and they like I think it was like Sunday or something. Like a new HelloFresh will come and they'll send 3 meals usually with it with all the pre-portioned ingredients. And but then like Grace will come up to me with 3 like recipes and she'll be like, which one of these do you want? And then it's like, I guess I all of a sudden, not only do I have to not go out to a restaurant to like have a menu, I can just sit and like watch TV and then I get to decide what meal. And then at the end of it, it's like, well, I haven't. People used to like go like, what are we gonna do tonight for dinner, and like make a recipe and get creative, or we have this in the house, and we'll still do that. But there's enough times where it's like, there's no decision. Like it's like the decision excuse me, like you're saying, there's so many decisions. And so
Yes.
like, okay, I'll do that. If there was 4 meals, I'd freak out. I'm like, usually I'm like, whatever, whichever one. I could truly couldn't care unless it's meatloaf, and I really like meatloaf. So that's beside the point.
Yes.
But anyway,
But
I
yeah,
get what
no,
you're
and
saying.
here's the thing. Like, if this is true, if we live in the age of anxiety in the modern first world, then the what will happen is as people experience profound anxiety, they're more likely to do one of two things. One, either find someone who imposes limits on them. So going back to conservative religion, so that whole kind of reverting to the trad movement, back to traditional religion, or
Trad cats,
to what's that?
the trad cats.
The trad cats, yes, which sounds cool, but I'm not so
It is.
fond of that move. I know a few people who have done it. They
It's weird.
or political reactionaries. You go to a kind of reactionary position where there's rules that
Yeah.
allow you to enjoy because there is. Or the one that I think is most dangerous is you start to impose your own limits. You start to become whether like you put your own limits so as you don't go out, so that you kind of are more frightened of the other, and you find like obsessive compulsives more and more rituals that you do at home that
Yeah.
kind of make your life smaller and smaller and smaller. And I think
Is
all
it
of these are
aesthetic?
simultaneously happening.
Is that how you say it? Aesthetic? Is that what that is?
What did I say? Oh, the
Is
aesthetic.
that is or aesthetic? Is that how you say that word? When you like take things away from yourself and you live a very sort of high aesthetic.
Yeah, the
ASCETIC.
aesthete. The aesthete.
Is that how you say it?
Yeah,
Okay, great. Aesthetes.
yeah. I think you're saying it pretty much right. Yeah, the aesthete, aesthetic. Yeah, it's very close to the aesthetic, which is kind of what's
Right.
beautiful. But the aesthete, yes, is the one who removes more and more. And the obsessive compulsive person is the one who gives themselves more and more rituals. Now, I go on, man, in LA, not that I want to, now I've left it. I love LA and I miss it, but I miss
Oh,
you.
here we go.
Yes.
The classic leave LA and now you can have a better perspective given your I understand. Let's hear
I
it.
understand it.
Let's
Okay, I'm going to slag LA for a second, but I would have said that when I was there. Is the amount of obsessive rituals people have around food and health and fashion, and it's quite impressive how it's harder and harder to simply enjoy. So even something like a drug experience becomes like, oh, I'm going to do a day fast. I'm going to then go to Peru and get like poison from
yeah.
a frog and put it on my skin, or certain eating disorders are spiritualized, to kind of become. But there's more and more restraints that people put on themselves, and the reason why I think it happens in LA a lot is precisely because LA is the place where you experience radical freedom, where you're told, yeah, you can go out and do anything you want, be anyone you want. And precisely that is going to be the society where people put more and more constraints on themselves.
One of my in one of my classes, we were discussing the spiritual but not religious movement, or SBNR.
Yeah.
And I would say that another reason Los Angeles is like that is because of the California being the birthplace of like the countercultural movement, and then people, the hippies and everyone, and the beat poets or whatever, running away from religion and finding freedom in the open world and open land. And it was an interesting discussion because I think there's value in the spirit being spiritual but not religious, but then at the same time, like you're saying, doesn't have that like container of things and rules and actual like public rituals that have been passed down for a while. Instead, it's just like you flying by the seat of your own pants, and it can
Yes.
get a little
Which
nutty.
creates a lot of anxiety. I mean, I think, like, not all the time, and 9 times out of 10, the kind of hippie spiritual culture ends up becoming fascist. It ends up eating itself. And like, think of Jim Jones, and think of the Jesus freaks and all. Like in LA, whenever you create a commune where everything is free love and free possibility and enjoyment, because that creates such a high level of anxiety, what often happens is those communities start to have a whole pile of rules and regulations that, in order to start to manage their enjoyment. So they don't even notice it, but very gradually there's speech restrictions, there's restrictions on what you can say and how you can relate to each other. There's restrictions. All these restrictions come in, and it's precisely because the free-for-all, the kind of spiritual kind of openness, is precisely what generates a profound anxiety. Just like a child, if you don't give a child boundaries, they get profoundly anxious. You let them eat all the chocolate they want, play all the Nerf battles they want. The oceanic openness provides a context for the increase in anxiety. So in the same way, it happens in communities.
Yeah, one of my favorite writers that I've spoken about with you, and I think on the podcast before, I just finished his most recent book called The Superhumanities by a guy named Jeffrey Kripal, and he's I think at Rice University, and he's a scholar of religions or comparative religions or something like that. And he said something at one point about like the purpose of religion is not always to like connect you with the divine; it's actually to protect you from it,
Yes.
and like
Yes.
kind of be a shield, because otherwise you're just in this. You don't know what's going to pop out at you, because then all of a sudden you start getting into aliens, or you start thinking that that there's an alien species living underwater, and you start thinking that if I go out to Catalina Island, on the west side of Catalina Island is a hot spot for UFOs, and then you start planning a weekend getaway to surprise your spouse for Christmas to go to Catalina Island. Then you find out that she isn't really into just seeing UFOs, and that doesn't feel very romantic to her, and then you start getting into a fight, and the next thing you know, you guys are at the courthouse, you got lawyers, you're figuring it out, you're screaming at each other, you've forgotten why you loved each other in the first place, and it's all because of the spiritual but not religious movement in Los Angeles.
Amen. Absolutely. I know that's just a hypothetical, but that's
Hypothetical. It's just
hypothetical.
thrown out. Something to think about. What do you make?
Here, can I jump in on that? Yeah, because
Please.
this is a very good point. Is that and Jung said it, as you know, is like Jung said, religion is a protection against God. The interesting thing is that we actually need a semi-permeable barrier to protect us from the. I don't. Well, I'll say this and then I'll say what I think. But a semi-permeable barrier that protects us from the absolute, or from the absolute pleasure or enjoyment, the thing that we really want. And if spirituality says you can have this relationship with the lost object, you can have whatever you want, that's precisely what we want to protect ourselves from. Now, not consciously. Consciously, we think we want the mother other, we want the lost object, but unconsciously, we actually, the more we get closer to the lost object, the more frightened we become. That's why Lacan called the mother a crocodile. He said that this crocodile, that you need language to keep the mouth of the crocodile open so as it doesn't consume you. And that's just a metaphor for that we need some separation from the face of God, right? We need to hide behind the rock. We need to be protected. So religion is, whenever people say you're spiritual, not religious, but religion prevents you from encountering the absolute. The proper religious person says exactly.
Yeah, and you're welcome.
Yes, you're welcome. Yeah. Now, I just think that the absolute's created by the barrier. That's the only thing I'd add to that. But yeah, yeah.
And just like that, I'm
Mm.
confused again. We were the. You can keep going if you want. I mean, I find it interesting, but I can piece it together. I get the metaphor. I don't think it's a great metaphor, just in terms of metaphors go, because
Oh yeah.
it kind of loses its metaphor with the language part. But I understand that Lacan was all about language. But you think the absolute has a barrier? I don't know. Oh,
Oh
like an
yeah.
actual impermeable barrier.
So if you like very briefly, I'll say like three different understandings of the sublime. So there's Burke, whose understanding of the sublime is when something you encounter someone so beautiful that they briefly express true beauty, or you
Hmm.
see a truth that expresses absolute truth. So the sublime are those moments
Very
when we
platonic.
encounter something. What's that?
It's very platonic,
Yes,
or
very platonic,
Neoplatonic.
and yeah, and we get this moment where we kind of get out of the cave. We maybe don't get out of the cave, but we glimpse outside the cave. That's the sublime. Now,
Yep.
for Kant, the sublime is slightly different. The sublime is a failure in the world that brings to mind what you cannot express. So if you say to somebody, words cannot describe how much I love you, that's a failure in language, but actually that failure kind of brings to mind love. So it's a failure that
Hmm.
succeeds. It's a failure that kind of like actually brings to mind something that you can't actually put into words. So it's actually not the failure of language. It's kind of the success of language. Language is successful in its very failure. Um, and religion, in the Kantian sense, is a kind of barrier to the absolute that actually brings to mind the absolute. That the only way to bring to mind that which is otherwise than we can conceptualize is through some sort of failure, some sort of some sort of problem. So, I mean, a Platonic example is we don't know what true reality is, but we know that we don't know it. And
Yeah.
as soon
Yeah.
as we acknowledge our ignorance, there's something we actually then affirm what we don't know. We say, oh, I don't know what ultimate reality is, but you're kind of affirming that there is ultimate reality. So religion can be seen as like that. Religion is a type of barrier to the absolute that actually um, brings to mind the absolute. Then
Yeah.
the third one is the Hegelian, which is the one I mentioned, which is where the absolute is generated by the failure. The failure to describe something generates what it feels to describe. So yeah, and so those are the three types of, I think, sublime and religious
Um,
too.
you ever think about getting into philosophy? That's good,
Occasionally.
man. Yeah. I know a guy. If you are curious about that world at all, what was I going to say that was actually not just a pithy remark that I actually offered something of some semblance of substance about the sublime. I don't remember. But yeah, that's great. I like that. I
Yeah.
like the sublime. I like how you use the word sublime too,
Oh yeah,
because
and it
how
kind of
you. Oh,
oh
I'm sorry. I remembered my incredible point.
great.
It wasn't really a point because what you said reminded me of the thing I was reading. That still, it's like one of those really fun things I think to just kind of sit with. But it was about this idea that makes sense if you think about it, and it also is just makes it feel like we're really in a simulation. But it's that idea that because we evolved through natural selection, that we did not evolve in any way to tell the truth about the nature of reality at all. There was no reason for nature to select us being right about things. It was only selecting us to be able to reproduce, and so therefore the actual outside world could be absolutely nothing like we think, but we have adapted in such a way that we can function within it, which is just kind of fun to think about. And then it also, I think, is a good humbling thing. So anyway, that's
Yes.
my big statement. That's
Yeah,
my
and
own interpretation, by the way.
though that is a really interesting thing, right? As C.S. Lewis talks about that, where he says like if you take a purely naturalistic view of the world, yes, as you say, nature does not it doesn't have a telos towards reason. It has towards reproduction. Um, But then the question is, well, can we know reality, or like is 2 + 2 = 4 really true? And obviously,
Mm-hmm.
I want to say it is. So I have to square that circle. I have to say, why does reason arise out of this weird natural evolutionary process? And some people want to say it doesn't. Some people want to say 2 + 2 = 4 is invented. Um, and some people want to say
Yeah,
that
socially constructed. Yeah.
socially constructed, and that's a big thing today. Actually, in fact, it connects with what we wanted to talk about. But without throwing some people under the bus, there is an idea that everything is particularistic, and the violence of society is by somebody taking their, say, Western view, their Western kind of philosophy, and universalizing it. That's the danger, and you often hear that, like, white supremacy is whenever you take a contextual particular European notion and you pretend that it is universally true. um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so that's very common today. I've got some friends. I got somebody, a friend of ours, actually put something like that on Instagram a few weeks ago. But yeah.
About what? Can you give me? Can you talk vaguely enough about it that it's?
Oh yeah, well, it's interesting, and sorry, but saying that our notion of kind of westernized scientific method is not a universal. It's a particular way of thinking about the world, and other people have particular ways of accessing the truth about the world. But when we take something like a scientific method and we say that that has a universal appeal, that has a universal truth dimension to it, we are hiding prejudices. And there's something
I
really
can.
interesting about that argument.
No, I can agree partially. I think both sides are partially true because I don't think you want to speak in such broad strokes that you like flatten out everybody's actual differences and upbringings and social and genetics and say blah blah blah, and then you also don't want to be so specific that you lose the ability to talk about humanity as a whole because then where do you go? It's like you
Yes.
gotta both are like necessary, and I think if you do one more than the other constantly, you're gonna end up in a bad situation because then you can't take anything as truth, or you can't take people for historically situated and geographically situated people.
Yes. Can I give you, like, I think this can help us understand the culture wars. Can I give you my brief description of the culture wars and see what you think?
Oh, let's like yeah,
Uh,
because we were trying to talk about Elon Musk and
yes.
his hooligans. Yeah.
Yes, and he's kind of found himself part of all of this. Is that so? For me, identitarianism, which often people talk about as the right alt right, but I'll use it, identitarianism, is usually the idea that under the guise of some universal, like meritocracy or something like that, some universal, actually it really benefits one particular group. So identitarians often talk about universals, universal things, but
Yeah.
beneath it, there is some benefit to a particular group. Then identity politics is generally the people who show that. They show that there's a prejudice in the so-called universal. But then identity politics they will say that what you have is particular identities and particular ways of seeing the world. And the problem is when you take one of those particular ways and you universalize it, that's the problem. What we instead have to do is create a society where different particular worldviews, different particular ways of engaging with society, and different identities are valued, and those intersect in various ways. So there's
Mm.
intersectional dimensions, but there is no positive universal. So identitarians say there's a positive universal. Identity politics says no. Beneath your supposed, hey, we're all equal, that benefits some particular group. And but then for me, the critique of that is that there is a universal, which is the negative itself. The universal is the there is something universal. It's not a positive, but it's a negative universal. But that's what I see in terms of the culture wars. Is that some side are saying we speak in the name of universals and universal truth. The other side says no, no, no. Beneath that, there's all these prejudices and these um, uh, benefits to one particular group, and that's kind of the culture wars in a nutshell for
Mm-hmm.
me.
Nice. Yeah. That'll. I mean, I think that, and the negative thing sounds like a apophatic kind of. You're not the universal thing is that everyone is the lack. Is that what you're kind of getting
Yes.
at? The
Yeah.
Lacanian
Yeah.
lack.
Well, I see you know me too well. You see, I'm always going to come back to that.
Hold on, guys. Pete needs to talk about the lack for a second.
Yes. Yeah. Well, if it's true, it's true.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I get it. Well, so what is your takeaway? Because I'll share my opinion on the Musk situation, which is very quick and shallow. For one, I'm exhausted by it, and for two, I don't trust billionaire people. That said, I find Musk to be fascinating, and I think he's a very interesting person, and I don't see him as a demon. I don't see him as a good guy. I don't see him as a genius. I don't think he's an idiot either. Thank you for your time.
That is very milquetoast. That is very
Yeah,
milquetoast.
I mean, and if I had some hot take on Musk, I would share it. I think it's funny that he put a Twitter poll out. We're doing this on the 19th of December, but he put a Twitter poll out saying he'll quit if the poll says he should quit, and then the poll says he should quit, and then there's all these reports that actually that was just set up because of his investors being like, we want a new CEO. And I do like the idea that Tom from MySpace chimed in as a potential candidate to run Twitter, and everybody cheered him on because I love Tom from MySpace. So,
oh yeah, no, I mean, it seems obvious to me that that's his way out. Yeah, but anyway, but that's beside the point. Yeah. And not only in the terms of that position or whatever. Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is then the question of free speech at first, like connecting it with what we've been talking about, is that
great.
Free speech is interesting because in terms of if you have, as I say, if this is true, that the more freedom we have, the more we will constrain ourselves, the more prohibitions we will require in order to quieten our anxiety, just like a kid creates obsessive compulsive things because the world is so open. Then what we're seeing in this culture war about free speech is anxiety and the response to anxiety, and then the question is, what is the correct response to all of this? And depending on what side you're on, you get enjoyment from different things. So for me, what's really interesting is how do people extract their enjoyment? So, for example, people on the right, well, people on the left, the supposed left, the identity politics, they extract their enjoyment from things like videos about Karens, videos that expose that the supposed universal person is actually prejudiced and particularistic and whatever. So that's the enjoyment of that side. The enjoyment of identitarians is showing up identity politics people as logically inconsistent, falling foul of their own impossibility, like, but not being able to articulate universals. So you think of Matt Walsh and What is a Woman or whatever like that. So there's different ways to extract enjoyment depending on where you are. And what you're seeing in this battle of free speech is different ways anxiety expresses itself, and I think different ways in which people are finding enjoyment. Now, that's not saying very much. Do you want me to keep going?
I mean, maybe. No, I like it. Maybe it explains why I'm not that, I guess, libidinally invested in it, and because there's the lack of, I don't feel that necessarily being anxiety when I'm reading this stuff. But it is fascinating. It is like here's what gets under my go. Here's what gets my the Musk simps and the idolization of this guy of really kind of weird, like father figure, like Daddy Musk is gonna save everything and he's here to it reminds me of an actual kind of like child looking up at a superhero, except it's more real life, and it seems like there's a whole lot of them, and it seems like that would fit in with your anxiety because, of course, these men, usually dudes, are going to be like, if they're going to have anxiety, they're going to do what a little kid would do and have a superhero. But it's cringy to read. It's cringy to read their adoration.
The only thing I would say is, and like, so I'm a fan of Elon Musk, have been for years. So, and I'll say, and I can give reasons for that. But what I would say is that there's just as many people, it seems, who overly kind of demonize and overly kind of have a negative affect in relation to
Oh,
Musk.
absolutely.
So if we take all of those people out, people who are having like where he has some sort of symbol. So for both of them, there's a paternal symbolism. One is the father to reject, the other the father to accept.
Yeah.
I hear you, but I do think I mean, and maybe statistically you'll find whatever, but I think there's people on both sides, like, people who love him and hate him. So the question more is, how do we navigate free speech? For me, that's the question. And and the thing that everyone agrees on, well, not everyone, but is that obviously, I can't talk about this, that you have to have certain restrictions in order to have freedom. So you have to have traffic laws in order to have freedom to travel, right? Without restrictions of travel laws, you wouldn't be able to travel. There wouldn't be any way to go about. So there is a certain sense in which there are certain constrictions that are required in order for freedom to happen. And a lot of the discussion, of course, is around what those are. And yeah, I do like the fact that I think you're a little bit more critical. I'm a little bit more sympathetic to Musk.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, we could talk about that instead of free speech. I'm kind of interested in we did talk about, did we ever release the episode we did on Musk and space travel? We did one on Musk, and I was very pro this kind of attempt to go to Mars. I don't know if we ever released that episode.
Yeah, that is funny because I was reading in prep for this podcast some of the it's like I'm not inundated with this constantly. I was Googled why do people not like Elon Musk, and it was this article that I'm pretty sure was written by AI. It didn't seem to have much of a soul behind its writing, and it just, I was like, this isn't a real thing, but it was good enough for an AI article. And one of the things was mentioning the space travel and like the colonizing of space. So of course that's right over the plate of that critical kind of well, this is bad, don't go taking over space too, taking over everything else. And I get that, but then the people, each thing would say, and here's why people actually like Musk for this, and the reason they like Musk is because the space travel is cool and it's neat, and if we need it, great, and it's cool to see somebody doing something like that who has the resources. It's very like Iron Man-y.
But
it's funny that it did just come up in that thing that I read.
That's funny because this is one of the main reasons that I'm pro Musk, and it's that basically Musk has I don't know if he'd articulate it quite like this, but basically, and we've talked about this, but that one of the most rare substances in the world is reason. Self-conscious is reason, right? So even if we think there's aliens or whatever, like we don't really have any proof or whatever. So we're looking at the universe, and in this vast universe, it looks like reason, the mind concept, not my mind or your mind, but mind itself, is incredibly rare. That it's almost so rare that it's actually. This sounds crazy to say because it's always very popular to say, oh, well, there obviously has to be life elsewhere. But there is also some people who argue that potentially life is so difficult, so difficult to get from life to reason, right? Which takes a couple of 100 million years, whatever. To get to that place is so difficult that it might be almost absent from the universe. I mean, maybe a couple of places, but like in the vast universe, it might be almost completely absent. And so Musk, his whole policy is we need to protect reason, not us, not me or you or him, but we have to protect mind itself, reason, self-consciousness, because it's so rare, and we have to get it off the planet. Like we are literally, I think we're like just literally a couple of 100 million years away from the planet Earth disappearing entirely as a habitable place. So I like people who have long-term plans, and for Musk, the long-term plan is that we need to protect self-consciousness, because self-consciousness is so rare that it's so rare that it sounds crazy to say, but this might be the only place that it exists. I don't think that, but there are intelligent people who think that is a possibility.
It sure seems like we're not that intelligent, though. I don't know that the bar is set completely high. I feel like that there's I don't know that there because I saw some article that was about the fix to the Fermi's paradox for
Oh
aliens,
yeah.
and it was like we just don't meet the technological cutoff. Like we're not worthy enough, basically, to go to take the expenditure out or use the resources to come travel because like we're not notable yet. And so there's the other way of it's basically the opposite of what you're saying, which is just fun.
Yes.
That there's actually no people are waiting on us to catch up, or not people, but whoever, and that's why they're just not coming here, which I think is
Oh yeah, we're in a
a cute
zoo. That's
cute
kind,
idea.
that's kind of the
Yeah,
zoo theory. Yeah, I mean,
the zoo.
Fermat's
Yeah, yeah,
paradox is very, very interesting. And I mean, what I like about it is I think the main takeaway of it is again how difficult. Like, there's basically a number of thresholds that the one has to overcome to become interplanetary, to become, or well, let's say to enter into reason. So many thresholds that it's almost unfathomable that it ever happened. And the only reason why we can say is because it's happened to us. It's like the lottery there is someone has to win the lottery, and if I won the lottery, I'd be like, oh, of course it was rational to play the lottery because I won. But it's not really rational to play the lottery, but someone has to win. So in a sense, we may be the winners in terms of like we got to reason, which means we got to understand how triangles work. And maybe
yeah.
some other species got to know how triangles work, but if they did, it seems like it's incredibly rare. Unless, as you say, like we're in a zoo,
Yeah.
which I find less persuasive.
I like it. I think, and I think it's funny that we made roller coasters because we like to scare ourselves, and we're just like, I think it's fun to imagine being just a different echelon of consciousness, and then look down and be like, oh, there I am, showering, just doing my thing. It's just fun.
Because here's the
And
thing:
space is big.
if there is a hyper intelligent civilization, triangles work the same way for them as they do for us. That's what reason is. Reason is that water still boils for them at the same temperature, and velocity works in the same way, and all of that. So these hyper intelligent beings, reality still works the same way as it does for us.
But I mean, what if there's a post-reason species out there that's gotten past the next hurdle, and the only reason they know about that level is because they've attained it, which obviously we can't know about it because we haven't. Where
Yes.
triangles got four sides and 2 + 2 = circle.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
I'm. If you have any more questions, just ask. I'm pretty into philosophy, and I can help you out.
Yeah.
So back to free speech, whatnot. My
Oh
understanding is the
yes.
dude says he's super into free speech. He's gonna absolutely no one's gonna be banned. Next thing you know, Twitter's not allowing people to tweet out to other social media sites. He's banning journalists left and right. He's saying that there were dangerous things happening as a result of this jet tracker thing, but then police found no evidence, so it almost seems as if he made it up entirely. And then in an effort to sort of do what he wants to do, and I feel like that's a bad thing. And I feel like it's and then you got the journalists getting banned. Isn't that like, how do you square that with the free speech? Him kind of coming in as a free speech absolutist or whatever it was. He
Yeah.
put.
Well, so for me, yeah, that is kind of the positive universal hitting upon all of its inherent contradictions. Now, in each of those examples, we could we could pick them apart. So while I am broadly sympathetic to what's going on, which is um, one, you kind of have free speech as this universal, and then you hit all sorts of barriers and cases, and then have to re-navigate. Um, so there are questions. So for example, doxing is the big one, right?
Yeah.
Should doxing, and this connects with at least a few of the things that you mentioned, right? So first of all, what is doxing? Should doxing be allowed? Um, that's a really big question, and that's a limit. And I think that's kind of one of the places that a debate is going on now. Also, not a debate. Also, there's people who are being tribal, but there is a debate, and an interesting debate about what is doxing, what does it mean. So, for example, um, in a very simple way, to put someone's real-time location online, should that be allowed? Or not even real-time location, or where they live. They may not be there at the time, but you put their home online. And then if someone puts that online and then someone else tweets it, should they be suspended? Because it's now public knowledge, right? So this person doxed you, but this person is just reporting on the doxing. And so these are questions that are not different, but they're just these are the interesting questions. I'm personally against
robbed
doxing.
a bank. Okay, yeah, because like someone robbed a bank and then somebody gets some of the money from the bank robbery. Do they both go to jail for robbing the bank when only one of them robbed the bank? Is that what
That
you're saying?
analogy might. Well, are you saying if the person knowingly takes the money?
Yeah, knew it was stolen and took it, or maybe it fell out of the bag when they were doing their really cool car chase scene, and a bag of money fell out next to them, and they could tell that police are flying by, they know it's stolen, they take it. Are they committing a crime? And they would be committing a crime.
Well, no, actually, that's a good example, because this is the problem in law, is intentionality, and intentionality is a nightmare, because so for example, you can get caught speeding, and if you say to the police officer, I didn't see the speed limit sign, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your intention is, it matters whether. So maybe the idea is that the person who took the money, they wouldn't be arrested necessarily, but the money would be taken off them. So for example, if you retweeted someone who doxed a person, that tweet might be taken down, but you might not be banned. Maybe that's a way of doing it, because the person could say, my intention was not to dox, but does intentionality matter or not? I mean, that's a very difficult question.
You said that you're against personally doxing, but that sounds as though it is a debatable stance, as though it's like almost like I personally am against isn't pretty much wouldn't everybody be against doxing? I mean, I'm having like flashbacks of my YouTube days, like bigger YouTube days, as opposed to now, when it was like actually people could do things, and you could get really screwed up if you took a photo and it showed where you were at a particular spot, and people would show up, like people would, and then people would take photos when they're not looking at them, and it seems just in general a bad thing.
Well, I totally agree. I totally agree, but I think the issue is, so maybe everyone's against doxing, but what? So for example, Elon Musk's jet,
the plane
coordinates, is that doxing? So yeah, that's a good point. Is that I think most sensible people are against doxing, but the question is, if it's publicly available information, is that doxing? Or if it's publicly available but it's difficult to get, or those are or if it was private and someone publicly puts it up and then someone else retweets the public, that's, I suppose, maybe that's where it's debatable. I think the Elon Musk jet thing is doxing. I don't think that should be. I think he should.
Really?
Oh yeah. If you say the real time location of
it's moving though, Pete.
Well, no, because
the plane's moving.
Yes, but you're tracking. You know where it's come from and where it's going to, and where it is at any particular moment.
That's fair. And the fear is that someone will see Elon's jet and be like, I'm going to go meet Elon because I'm a crazy person. And they're going to be able to get into the airport, past security, and they're going to be able to...
Doesn't matter. I mean, if your criteria is doxing is allowed as long as someone has enough security, then that's different. So if you're saying, well, can you dox somebody if it's in an airport where there's security and police? You're saying,
Am I doxing the president if I say he's in the White House?
No, and this is where
post the address
conversation. Yes, that is not, and this is where it's in. Brilliant, right? That I would say that's not doxing.
Okay.
Now, so what's the difference between? So, for example, Elon Musk had a privacy thing on his jet that the guy Sweeney cracked through an algorithm. So, Elon Musk was paid to have his private jet not public knowledge, and Sweeney, in February, this was February, kind of cracked that algorithm, created an algorithm that could still work out what code was being used for Elon Musk's jet. think
People are so
that's
smart.
not good.
That's
Yeah, super smart.
so
But
smart.
then Elon Musk took that off. So yeah, that's a good question, right? The president in the White House, is that doxing? And why is it not doxing if it's not doxing, right? That's a good question. Let me
Probably
think.
public knowledge, right? Most people would imagine. I'm sure he travels a lot. He's a busy guy, but I would imagine that It's a building that is known for housing the president. Be like doxing the Pope by saying he's at the Vatican, and I can
Yeah.
understand it being a private jet, you're traveling, and you don't want to worry about it. I get the idea of not wanting your travel information out there. When
But it's
your
a good
whole thing,
question. Yeah, it's a good question. Like, so, but I think you maybe hit it, is like, if it's public knowledge, and that's what doxing is, not doxing if it's public knowledge. But that doesn't probably fix it completely either. This is what's great. This is why it has to be back and forth. Because so let's say it's not doxing if it's public knowledge. If I know where you are publicly, as in I can type in where is Elliott Morgan, where does he live, and it comes up, and it's on the internet, and you've told it, you've said it yourself. You're right. You've put your address up. That's not doxing, is it? Would we say that's not doxing, or is it?
I mean, there's got to be like you're saying, the intentionality, right? I mean, it doesn't. Also, why would you do that? That seems like boring information for people.
Although the why doesn't matter. Again, the law doesn't care about the why. Like, somebody might want to, like, I've had stalkers. You've probably had stalkers, like, even people who are as small as us can kind of have people who, if they know where we
Yeah.
live, can, I had someone fly to an event that I
Uh-huh.
was speaking at,
Oh,
but that was public knowledge.
you've had some gold in
I've had
terms
some
of
goals, yes.
stalking.
But that wasn't doxing, because that was public knowledge. Like, it was public knowledge where I was going to be, because I put
Yeah,
it out there.
that wasn't the creepy
That so
part.
that's Yeah, so that's completely fine. But if I don't want my location known, I guess that's it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So that
But the
intention does matter then.
intention. Well, um, yeah, I'm nervous about saying that. So I'm more maybe saying, if it's public, no, if it's publicly out there and it's publicly advertised, then that's not doxing. If it's private, it is, and then there's probably this really annoying middle range, right? So maybe Elon Musk jet is a middle thing. It's a test case. But
It exists in international waters. It's not under the jurisdiction of any particular viewpoint. It's we can use the metaphor as long as we want. So
yeah.
I
Oh, here. Well,
I don't.
here's an easy solution. Is it's doxing if someone says, I don't want my information out there, whether it's Elon Musk, the president, or me. It's like, is that an easy way to say? Is that it's doxing as soon as someone says, my information is online, I do not want it to be online? Is that the answer?
Yeah, I mean, that isn't that the whole Hunter Biden laptop controversy, that like the is this big scandal when the Biden administration, prior to being the Biden administration, had the New York Post take their like story down that basically showed nudes of Hunter Biden, because Hunter Biden was like, you can't share naked pictures of me and I don't want that on the internet, and so they took it down. I mean, I feel like the whole revenge porn world is very dark and weird, and it's not your location, but I'd care much less about my location than I would about my booty. I don't want my booty being out there for the world to see. That's
I don't. I
my
don't think
wife's
that's
and
the. I don't think that's
God's.
the controversial bit. That's right. But I know, like, I'm no friend of the Democrats. So I remember at the time, like, there's a a Russian. There's a Russian parable about this guy. It's illegal to talk about the atrocities of Stalin, and he's out in Red Square handing out flyers, and the KGB hear that he's out handing out flyers that detail the atrocities of Stalinist regime. So the KGB go to arrest him. They grab the leaflets off him, but they're completely empty. They're going like, there's nothing written on these. They're empty, right? Piss off. And they said, by the way, why are you handing out empty leaflets? And the guy says, well, why bother writing it down? Sure, everybody already knows. Right? So whenever Hunter Biden happened, I was like, of course it was of course there was a conspiracy to keep it off the internet. Like, it was obvious. But it's kind of good that there's receipts for it now. But it was obvious that Twitter were suppressing the story. That's how I see it. Is that it was obvious they were repressing the story, but not because of
But if
nudes.
Well, let's say it was though. I mean, let's say, and also that it's it doesn't matter. I mean, if like it can be for any reason. If he didn't want his information out there, then
Yes,
does the
yeah.
website
Unless
if
it's
like you were
criminal.
saying?
That's it. Unless it's criminal, and this is the thing, because I was going to mention this. This is a good question. If it's criminal, so for example, you can share online, say for example, the registration plate or the house of if there's a crime and you're trying to a crime is being committed, then I think that's an exception. If there's a crime being now, you're right, as in. Can you know in advance if a crime is being committed? So with Hunter Biden, that might be an issue. Is we don't know at that time. We didn't know if a crime had been committed, and so
My understanding of
yeah,
the Hunter Biden thing, dude, is so like because never mind the yeah, we can talk about the Minority Report thing of arresting someone before a crime happens, or uh circumstantial evidence and all that stuff. But like there's no, where's the laptop? Why aren't they bringing it forward? And then how do you prove that there's like a chain of custody or whatever, that this was actually in the possession of Hunter Biden and didn't get weirdly tinkered with? And also, that guy's taking a hard drive off of a customer of his who's supposedly like leaving his laptop at some place in the middle of nowhere that happens to be owned by a massive legally blind Trump supporter, and then they won't bring the actual physical laptop forward to indicate that there might be like there's DNA all over our computers. They'd be able to find like a skin cell, and yet for
yeah,
some reason they don't do that, and so there's no way to prove at how the way that this goes back to the person that they're accusing. Then they got an article going up that isn't just the crimes, it's also salacious because it's nudes and stuff, because the New York Post, and obviously they're going to do that to get clicks. So I can understand being like, no, this isn't like a court of law right now. Like you can't do that. And that guy, it's a revenge porn type thing. Even if there's crime involved, it's still including his nudes. Does that make sense?
Well, I think what you're bringing out is like the really interesting complexity of this. Like, there's a whole pile of questions that need to be answered. It's interesting you're saying that you think that maybe, like, so for example, the story that came out at the time, which I find quite incredible, as in had lack of credibility, was
Quite
that this was
fantastic.
yes, was a Russian disinformation tactic. That's what the FBI
Yeah.
said. In fact, that's what some people on Twitter said was, this had all the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation attack. I, from the little bit I've looked at it, it seems very uncredible at this point that this was a Russian disinformation. I mean, at most, maybe, and I don't think this is the case, but maybe some fake emails were put into the hard drive. But it
Yeah. Yeah.
seems like it's mostly, if not 100%, was Hunter Biden's laptop. But are you saying that you think it wasn't?
No, I think there is a hard drive that has been tampered with and then passed around. There's already multiple versions that have been passed around within the Republican congressmen and congresspeople. So I don't get. It feels like there's no, at that point it's not a reliable thing. But maybe I'm just not. I just don't have my eyes open or whatever. But it
Well,
still
no.
seems like a fantastical story to me. And you can't take somebody's hard drive. That's breaking the law. Like you can't go like, let me take a hard drive and then leak it to the media. You take it to the police. Like, go to the police if there's a crime involved. And if you
Oh
see
yeah.
something like that, don't rip it off the computer and then add some emails and then go, look at this big cover up.
But then that just adds to complexity, as in, yes, if for example someone gets this hard drive, sends it to the media
Yeah.
and not to the police, they might have criminal charges made against them because it's going like, no, you should have done it in a certain way. But that doesn't negate necessarily what's on it. Like, it is a complicated and interesting
Yeah.
situation. I've
If,
always been critical of Twitter because I've always felt that it's silenced the voices of people I dislike. I've always felt
well, no,
that.
oh, I thought yeah, my issue with it is it lacks nuance. And now you just have to read threads constantly. You can't, back in the day, the word count made it very difficult to get a
Oh yeah, lack of
bigger
nuances.
thought
Yeah,
across.
yeah. And bots. I mean, there's a real bot problem.
Didn't they just come out and say though that they're not silencing, like they silence way more or they amplify conservative voices more than I know Facebook did, and I think Twitter as well. When they actually went through, they were like, no, there's not like a grand like algorithmic snuffing out of any particular thing. If anything, conservatives are more amplified on it. And so and then there's the idea that they're not doing that. I'm like, it seems like,
well, I don't know, like I'm an old school leftist, but I've always felt that people I dislike have been treated badly. Mm-hmm. I've always felt that the people I dislike have been maligned, shadow banned, and abused. So I think now the amount I've looked into it, but I need to look into it more. But I think that's true. Is that the people I despise have been profoundly mistreated? Yeah.
I shadow banned myself about 3 years ago. Yeah, I mean, we have our disagreements on this, but that's what's fun about this podcast.
That's what's fun about the podcast. Yes.
The just vicious arguing that happens, and I'm sorry for if it's ugly. I know it's near Christmas, maybe the New Year when this goes up, to our listeners for such a very I'm sorry for being so aggressive, Pete, in my opinions here, but I'm just trying to care about free speech, and I love Elon Musk.
I feel that you've treated me very badly, and this is very sad. What I would like you to do, in fact, like this is beside the point that we can put this in or not, but send me something that you feel is a very good analysis of your position. I'll send you something that I feel is a very good analysis of like the position I take, and because I would like to see something. I might have already seen it, but I don't know if I will have. But if you think there's a very good analysis, that really kind of articulates your concern, say with the Hunter Biden laptop, I want to watch it, and we could even do a podcast on it, and we could discuss it.
Yeah, that sounds good, because it'll give me an excuse to actually look into these things rather than just sort of taking the scraps of whatever I'm seeing tweeted by. Yeah. All right, man. This has been fun. Everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for staying patient with us as we make big life changes. We'll be back in the new year. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a comment. Please feel free to subscribe. You can even go to patreon.com/thefundamentalists if you're thinking, hey, these guys seem fun and cool and civil and nice, and go for it. And it helps us edit the podcast when we do it. And we appreciate everybody who's already done it. And I hope you all have a happy holiday season and happy new year. Boy, that one outro did not go as well as the intro did. I thought that was great.
I thought that was
really
lovely. Beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. Felt like speed bumps the whole time. All right. Well, thank you guys. Bye, everybody.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.